We can send robots to Mars, build quantum computers, and map the human genome, but we still stumble over a rusty hammer stuck in ancient rock. Today, we're diving into 10 real artifacts that shouldn't exist but do. Each one seems to whisper the same impossible question: what if history isn't as linear as we think? Archaeologists call them OOPArts, out-of-place artifacts, and they've been fueling arguments between skeptics, scientists, and dreamers for nearly a century. Some see them as misunderstood relics of known history. Others believe they're proof of something much stranger: forgotten civilizations, time travelers, or visitors not of this world. But here's the twist. Every single one of these objects is real, documented, analyzed, and still unsolved. So buckle up. We're starting with the hammer that shouldn't exist but does. The London Hammer. Imagine finding a tool that looks modern, locked inside rock older than the dinosaurs. That's exactly what happened in 1936, when a couple exploring near London, Texas, discovered a chunk of stone with a wooden handle sticking out of it. When their son cracked it open years later, inside was a hammer, and the rock surrounding it was estimated to be about 100 million years old. That's the London Hammer, a genuine object that defies logic. Metallurgical tests showed it's made of 96 Moss pure iron, a level of refinement that would normally require modern smelting technology. It barely rusts even after decades. That's strange considering most 19th century tools would have turned to dust by now. Skeptics argue it's not ancient at all. They say it's a miner's hammer from the 1800s that got encased in a concretion, a type of mineral deposit that forms surprisingly fast around metal objects. But others point to the unusual purity of the metal, the Cretaceous-era fossils embedded nearby, and the total lack of corrosion. Modern geologists note that concretions can indeed form over decades, but not all compositions match the hammer's unique matrix. Some researchers from Texas A&M even tried replicating it and couldn't get the same clean separation between metal and stone. So what are we looking at here? A 19th century tool with weird chemistry, or an artifact that shouldn't exist in this epoch at all? That's the frustrating beauty of the London Hammer. It stands on the border between science and the unknown, a reminder that the Earth sometimes hides its secrets in plain sight. And if you think that's strange, wait till you see what someone found inside a geode. The Koso artifact. You'd think by now scientists could tell the difference between an ancient fossil and a modern spark plug, but the Koso artifact blurs that line completely. In 1961, 3 amateur geologists exploring California's Koso Mountains cracked open what they thought was a geode, one of those beautiful rock bubbles filled with quartz crystals. But instead of glittering minerals, they found something entirely out of place: a small porcelain cylinder surrounding a metallic shaft eerily similar to a spark plug. Even weirder, a geologist reportedly dated the surrounding material to be around 500,000 years old. 500,000 years. That's before Homo sapiens even existed. The rock contained fossilized shells and mineral layers consistent with ancient sediment, not something you'd expect to find wrapped around 20th century machinery. When X-rays were taken, the images allegedly revealed a spring-like coil and a metallic cap inside almost identical to the structure of spark plugs used in early engines. Naturally, it became the darling of ancient astronaut theorists, proof they claimed that advanced technology existed long before recorded history. But then, just as the mystery deepened, the artifact vanished. The Koso plug hasn't been publicly seen since the late 1960s. Without it, no modern lab can test the material or verify its dating. Skeptics, of course, have their own explanation. They suggest it was nothing more than a 1920s-era champion spark plug, possibly from old mining equipment. Over time, they argue iron oxide built up around it, forming a concretion that only looks like a geode. In other words, nature's just really good at playing tricks on us. Yet here's where things get interesting. Researchers from the University of California later tested the composition of similar concretions, and while they can form in decades, the fossil shells and mineral pattern in the Koso sample don't fully align with that theory. Plus, no one can explain the fine-grained cementation seen on the artifact's casing. Was it an old engine part lost in the dirt? A misdated mineral oddity? Or something more? A ghost of technology from an age we can't even imagine? Until the artifact resurfaces, the question remains trapped in stone. And if you thought that was weird, the next discovery takes us from mysterious machines to maps that shouldn't exist. Maps that show continents no human had ever seen. The Piri Reis map. Maps are supposed to tell us where we've been, but sometimes they show us things humanity shouldn't have known. In 1929, a dusty old piece of gazelle skin was rediscovered in Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. On it was a world map drawn by Piri Reis, an Ottoman admiral and cartographer, dated 1513. At first glance, it looks like an impressive 16th century artifact. Europe, Africa, Brazil, all drawn with remarkable precision. But when scholars looked closer, their jaws dropped. At the very bottom of the map was a coastline, unmistakably resembling Antarctica, drawn centuries before it was officially discovered in 1820. Even stranger it seemed to depict the subglacial landmass beneath the ice. Something modern scientists only mapped in 1958 using seismic and radar technology. How could a man in the early 1500s know what the frozen continent looked like under 2 kilometers of ice? Reis himself claimed he compiled his map from 20 older sources, including some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great, and even one supposedly used by Christopher Columbus. That claim sent researchers spinning. If true, it means the map could contain fragments of knowledge from a civilization capable of global navigation thousands of years ago. Harvard historian Charles Hapgood took it further. In the 1950s, he proposed that the map was based on ancient charts created by an advanced seafaring culture that existed before recorded history, a lost civilization wiped out by an earth-shifting catastrophe. Albert Einstein himself read Hapgood's manuscript and commented that the theory was not impossible. Of course, mainstream cartographers have other ideas. They argue the supposed Antarctica is actually a distorted version of South America's southern coast stretched to fit the parchment. Others suggest it's artistic embellishment, a guess at the mythical Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land that old mapmakers loved to imagine. But here's the kicker. When overlaid digitally, the contours line up eerily well with the Queen Maud Land coast of Antarctica, almost too well to be coincidence. Even NASA analysts have noted the surprising accuracy. Whether it's a case of brilliant guesswork or a relic of lost global knowledge, the Piri race map remains one of history's most stubborn anomalies, a piece of parchment that quietly rewrites what humans might once have known. And speaking of ancient things that fly in the face of reason, let's talk about golden airplanes crafted over 1,000 years ago, the Quimbaya airplanes. You've seen ancient statues, tools, jewelry. But what about miniature jet planes from over 1,000 years ago? Hidden inside Bogota's Gold Museum in Colombia is a collection of small golden figures, each just a few inches long, made by the Quimbaya civilization around 100 CE. Officially, they're labeled as stylized birds or insects. But one look at them and you might raise an eyebrow because they don't really look like birds or bugs at all. They have fuselage's delta-shaped wings and vertical tail fins, the same aerodynamic structures used on modern aircraft. No feathers, no legs, no eyes. Just clean aerodynamic lines that would make any aerospace engineer do a double take. In the 1990s, 2 German engineers, Peter Belting and Konrad Lubbers, decided to test whether these ancient figures could actually fly. They built large-scale radio-controlled models based on the gold figurines. The result? Not only did they fly, they were remarkably stable, needing no major design corrections. That's where the mystery deepens. Could a civilization from the Amazon basin 1,000 years before the Wright brothers really have had some knowledge of aerodynamics? Mainstream archaeologists say no. They argue the figurines are simply artistic interpretations of flying fish or stylized animals common in Quimbaya culture. Ancient art. They point out often emphasized symmetry and geometry, which can easily look modern to our eyes. But here's the counterpoint. These golden objects show features that have no parallel in nature. The vertical tail fin, the smooth flat wings, the tapering nose, all hallmarks of flight design. Coincidence? Possibly. But even coincidence starts to look suspicious when physics agrees with the art. Modern tests by engineers at Columbia's National University using wind tunnels have shown that the objects display aerodynamic lift when air passes over them. They're not efficient by today's standards, but they could glide. And that raises fascinating questions about ancient experimentation. Maybe the Quimbaya weren't building jet planes, but they may have intuitively grasped the shapes that made flight possible. Like the Greeks discovering geometry or Egyptians aligning pyramids with the stars, they might have stumbled upon principles of physics long before those concepts had names. So was it an ancient flying machine, an artful coincidence, or a whisper of lost genius? Whatever the answer, the Quimbaya airplanes remind us that creativity and curiosity are as old as humanity itself. And if you think that's impressive, wait until we head to ancient Egypt, where a tiny wooden bird may prove they knew more about flight than we ever imagined. The Saqqara bird. In 1898, Egyptian archaeologists excavating a tomb at Saqqara uncovered a small, curious wooden object dating to around 200 BCE. It was labelled in a museum drawer as a bird model. For decades, no one gave it a second glance. Until one day in 1969, an Egyptologist named Khalil Messiah looked closer and realized this wasn't a bird. It had no legs, no feathers, and no painted eyes. But it did have wings shaped like an airfoil curved on top and flat underneath, just like airplane wings designed to create lift. Even more striking, it had a vertical tail fin, not the horizontal one birds use for balance. And its wings were slightly angled upward, a dihedral angle, a feature that provides stability in modern aircraft. This wasn't just an artistic carving, it looked engineered. Messiah believed the Saqqara bird might be a scale model for an ancient glider. So a team of engineers built a replica. When launched under controlled conditions, it glided beautifully. No motors, no tricks, just wood, air, and physics. Could the ancient Egyptians, builders of pyramids and masters of geometry, have also dabbled in early flight? Mainstream scholars remain skeptical. They argue it was likely a ceremonial object, perhaps a symbol of the god Horus who represented the sky and kingship. Others suggest it might have been a child's toy or even a weather vane. And sure, that's possible. But when you look at its proportions and aerodynamic accuracy, coincidence feels less convincing. Modern aerodynamic analysis by the University of Cairo confirmed that with a stabilizing tailplane added something that might have been lost over time, the bird's design would make it a fully functional glider. The balance wing curvature and weight distribution are textbook examples of aeronautical design. It's not proof of Egyptian airplanes, of course, but it is proof that ancient minds had a practical understanding of how air flows and lifts knowledge we like to think was only rediscovered in the modern era. Whether it was a sacred symbol or an early experiment in flight, the Saqqara bird captures that timeless human impulse to look at the sky and wonder what it feels like to soar. And if that makes you raise an eyebrow, wait until you see what's carved deep beneath another Egyptian temple reliefs that look suspiciously like light bulbs. The Dendera light bulbs. Deep under the temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt, lies a series of stone reliefs that have fueled one of archaeology's strangest debates. Carved over 2,000 years ago, they show figures holding what appear to be giant glass bulbs connected by cables to a box resembling an ancient power source. Inside each bulb snakes a filament-like shape, and if you squint, it looks exactly like the inside of a modern light bulb. Seriously, a bulb, a socket, and even something that looks like a wire. Coincidence or a spark of ancient electricity? Proponents of the Dendera light theory say it's no coincidence at all. They argue that the scene is a literal depiction of an ancient electrical device, perhaps a Crookes tube, the 19th century predecessor to the cathode ray tube. The snake inside the bulb, they say, represents plasma, and the box it's connected to is a power generator symbolized by the Geode pillar, a hieroglyph long associated with energy and stability. Their argument gains traction when you consider one detail. Many Egyptian tombs show no traces of soot on the ceilings, even in chambers deep underground. If torches or oil lamps had been used, those walls should be blackened. So how did they light the inner sanctums where the sun never shone? Mainstream Egyptologists, however, insist there's no evidence the ancient Egyptians ever harnessed electricity. They interpret the carvings as purely symbolic. The snake representing the god Harsomptus emerging from a lotus flower, a common motif for rebirth and creation. The cable is simply a stylized lotus stem, and the Geode pillar, they say, is a spiritual power symbol, not a power generator. Still, even professional engineers who've studied the carvings admit their technical resemblance is uncanny. When an Austrian television crew recreated the Dendera bulb as a glass vacuum tube in the 1990s, it actually lit up using low-voltage electricity to excite a gas-filled chamber, just like a fluorescent bulb. So what's the truth? Maybe the Dendera carvings are a cosmic coincidence, or maybe they're proof that human curiosity with light is older than we dare imagine. Either way, the idea that ancient civilizations might have glimpsed scientific principles thousands of years before their time is humbling. It makes us wonder how much have we rediscovered rather than invented. And if you think ancient Egypt's mysteries are strange, let's travel to China, where a mountain full of metal pipes seems to predate humanity itself. The Baigong pipes. High in China's remote Qinghai province at the foot of Mount Baigong lies one of the most bizarre archaeological discoveries on record, a network of metal pipes embedded in the rock, some as wide as your arm, others thin as straws, all leading deep into a pyramid-shaped mountain. When explorers first stumbled upon them, they assumed they were part of an old mining operation. But testing shattered that assumption. Some of the pipes were dated using thermoluminescence analysis to be as much as 150,000 years old. That's long before humans had learned to smelt metal. In fact, it's long before Homo sapiens even appeared in the region. So who or what built them? Chinese scientists collected samples from both the mountain cave and the nearby Toson Lake, where similar pipes poked through the shore. Chemical analysis revealed they were composed of 30% iron oxide, along with traces of silicon and calcium. But here's the twist. Some sections were perfectly circular, hollow, and evenly distributed like a designed plumbing system. Nature can do weird things, but symmetrical iron tubes embedded in rock, that's pushing it. Local legends call Mount Baigong the alien launch site, and it's not hard to see why. To believers, the pipes were once conduits for some forgotten technology, maybe even a launch structure built by extraterrestrials. The area even has a small monument dedicated to that theory. Skeptics and most geologists aren't convinced. They propose that the pipes are the result of a natural process involving iron-rich groundwater that slowly replaced organic material like tree roots over millennia. Essentially, they argue the pipes are fossilized roots, mineralized into hollow tubes that just look artificial. It's a tidy explanation until you realize some pipes run straight through the cave walls and into the mountain's interior in a geometric pattern that doesn't match any known root system. Even more curious radiation readings taken at the site show mild anomalies not dangerous but unusual for an uninhabited region. So what's more likely? A geological phenomenon that somehow mimics precision engineering or the decayed remnants of a civilization or species long erased from history? We may never know. The Baigong pipes sit in silence, half buried and half exposed, like an ancient riddle written in iron. But if you think that's strange, wait until you hear about a lump of coal that hid a manufactured metal cube inside rock that predated the dinosaurs. The Wolfsegg iron. In 1885, a miner working near the town of Wolfsegg, Austria, cracked open a block of coal and out rolled a small metallic object unlike anything he'd ever seen. It was roughly cube-shaped with clean edges, flat faces, and a precise groove carved around its middle. It didn't look like a rock at all, it looked machined. The coal it came from was estimated to be 20 million years old. That means this metal block, now known as the Wolfsegg iron or Salzburg cube, should not have existed. Iron tools simply didn't appear until about 3,000 years ago, let alone in the age of prehistoric mammals. When scientists examined it, the mystery deepened. It wasn't a meteorite, it lacked nickel, a telltale sign of extraterrestrial origin. Yet its composition and surface bore clear signs of refinement as though smelted and cast. Early researchers speculated it might be the fragment of a machine, or even an ancient artifact buried and fossilized in coal over millions of years. For decades, the object sat in the Salzburg Museum, puzzling anyone who saw it. And then, as with so many of these impossible artifacts, it vanished. Only plaster replicas remain. Modern analyses of those casts suggest the object could have been a piece of mining equipment, perhaps an iron ballast, or part of a 19th century machine that somehow fell into a coal seam. Skeptics argue that the coal might not have been ancient rock, but a looser layer that formed around it. But there's a lingering problem with that theory. The fossilized patina that once coated the original Wolfsegg iron wasn't consistent with modern oxidation. In fact, metallurgical studies from the 1960s found microcrystalline patterns typically seen in iron that has aged for tens of thousands of years, not a few centuries. And here's where it gets philosophical. Maybe the Wolfsegg iron isn't evidence of aliens or time travelers. Maybe it's a humbling reminder that Earth itself can mimic craftsmanship, that geology under pressure and time can create shapes that look deliberate, intelligent, even industrial. Still, it's hard to shake that image, a man splitting open ancient coal and finding a perfect iron cube staring back at him. It's like the universe whispering, you don't know the half of it. And if that wasn't eerie enough, wait until you hear about the Kingoodie hammer and iron tool that may have been forged hundreds of millions of years before humans ever existed. The Kingoodie hammer, Scotland, mid-19th century. Quarry workers near the village of Kingoodie were splitting sandstone for construction when one of them stopped because embedded inside the rock was something utterly impossible: the head of an iron hammer complete with part of its wooden handle. The sandstone layer it came from was dated to the Devonian period, roughly 400 million years old. That's before dinosaurs, before mammals, before trees had even fully evolved. The idea that a forged metal hammer could exist in that time frame defies everything we know about history. The discovery was recorded by Sir David Brewster, a respected physicist and member of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He described the hammerhead as about 3.5 inches long, still partially encased in stone, and so firmly embedded that part of the rock had to be chipped away to free it. The wooden handle, Brewster noted, had partially turned to coal, suggesting immense age and pressure. So what gives? Did a modern hammer somehow slip into a rock formation that took hundreds of millions of years to form? Or is it possible that the layer wasn't as old as claimed, that natural processes had somehow cemented newer material around it? Mainstream geologists argue that's exactly what happened. The Devonian sandstone, they say, could have contained fissures that filled later with newer sediments, trapping the hammer and fossilizing it through mineral percolation. Essentially, the rock formed around it far more recently than the surrounding strata. But the skeptics of skepticism point out that no clear evidence of such a fissure was documented in Brewster's notes, and the coalified wood remains an anomaly. When organic material turns to coal, it usually takes immense geological time, far longer than a few thousand years. Of course, like so many of these artifacts, the Kingoodie hammer itself has vanished. No one knows where it ended up. We're left with the written records and a handful of 19th century descriptions, but no physical proof. Still, the thought lingers. If even 1% of the report was accurate, it would rewrite the story of human technology, placing metalworkers on Earth when the most advanced life forms were fish. Whether it's a hoax, a misunderstanding, or a truth too strange for comfort, the Kingoodie hammer is one of those artifacts that keeps historians awake at night, a reminder that sometimes evidence doesn't just challenge history, it laughs at it. And yet, even that doesn't top our final artifact, a beautifully decorated metal vase discovered in solid rock that dates back hundreds of millions of years. The Dorchester pot. In 1852, workers were blasting through solid rock near Dorchester, Massachusetts, when an explosion revealed something that shouldn't have been there. A small bell-shaped metal pot blown clean out of a 600 million year old rock layer. The discovery was reported in Scientific American that same year. The pot was about 4.5 inches tall, cast from a zinc-silver alloy, and exquisitely decorated with silver floral inlays. It looked handcrafted, unmistakably human, yet it came from rock formed long before even multicellular life had flourished on Earth. To put that in perspective, 600 million years ago, there were no fish, no trees, no people, just strange jelly-like organisms drifting through ancient seas. So how could a man-made pot end up sealed in Precambrian rock? Eyewitnesses claimed it was found inside the stone. Not near it, the blast had simply cracked open its prison. The Dorchester pot instantly became a lightning rod for speculation. Some said it was proof of a forgotten prehistoric civilization. Others argued it was evidence of time anomalies, or even ancient visitors who walked the Earth before humanity itself evolved. But skeptics, as always, offered a grounded explanation. They suggested the pot was probably a Victorian pipe holder or candlestick that had been buried in debris and mistaken for something embedded in rock. They argued that the blast debris could have easily confused the workers about where it came from. That's plausible except for the consistency of early reports. Multiple witnesses swore the pot came from solid, unbroken rock before the blast. And the object's intricate design doesn't match typical 19th century domestic items. Unfortunately, like the Kingoodie hammer and Wolfsegg iron, the Dorchester pot has vanished. Only a single engraving remains published in Scientific American's 1852 issue. Without the original artifact, the mystery is impossible to resolve. Still, the implications linger like a ghost. If the report was accurate, it would mean that intelligent beings, artisans capable of metallurgy and design, existed hundreds of millions of years before humans. That idea defies logic, but so do many discoveries once dismissed as impossible: dinosaur fossils, deep-sea vents, bacteria surviving in space. Maybe, as physicist Arthur C. Clarke once said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Or maybe the real magic is in how the universe hides its secrets, waiting for curious minds to stumble upon them. From the London hammer to the Dorchester pot, these strange relics share one thing. They don't just challenge science, they challenge certainty itself. So what do we make of it all? The hammer sealed in stone, the spark plug in a geode, the map of Antarctica drawn before its discovery, and golden airplanes that could actually fly. Maybe these artifacts aren't proof of lost civilizations, time travel, or extraterrestrial engineers. Or maybe they are. But the real story isn't about confirming the impossible. It's about how close these mysteries bring us to confronting the limits of what we know. Science thrives on evidence, and skepticism is its best friend. But history has a habit of humbling us. Once people thought meteorites were a myth, rocks can't fall from the sky, they said, until one literally landed at their feet. We thought bacteria couldn't survive without sunlight, until we found entire ecosystems thriving around volcanic vents miles beneath the ocean. Maybe some of these objects are misidentified, misdated, or even misunderstood. But maybe, just maybe a few, are exactly what they seem, artifacts that whisper from a forgotten chapter of human or pre-human history. Each of them, whether it's the Piri Reis map showing an ice-free Antarctica, or the Saqqara bird that might have glided across Egyptian skies, invites us to remember something powerful, that knowledge isn't a straight line. It loops, it vanishes, it resurfaces. Civilizations rise, fall, and sometimes they leave breadcrumbs buried deep in the earth. Perhaps that's the most beautiful part of science, not having all the answers, but daring to ask the right questions. Because when we stop questioning, we stop discovering. So which of these mysteries shook your sense of reality the most? Was it the London hammer that defies time, or the Dendera carvings that glow with hidden light? Tell me in the comments below. And if you love diving into the weird corners of science and history, where facts meet wonder, hit that subscribe button. Because the universe is full of questions that textbooks haven't even begun to ask. The past may not be what we think it is, and the truth might still be waiting buried in stone.